All right, good morning, good afternoon. What's everybody up to today? Anything interesting going on? We've had one of those classic weather swings here. One of my pieces of good news today was that yesterday was totally summer here. Probably, doing my Fahrenheit to Celsius conversion, probably 25 degrees here. And I live in the north, so we ski, we have snow. And then today it's back to like -5. So that's what's going on here. Everyone's mad about that. So we're going to do a little bit of a short stream today. I have an appointment, so we're going to get right into, well, not right into things, because I want to talk about some good news, but I also have some morphing updates. And that's kind of why I did morphing today. Morphing is just, we kind of keep talking about morphing, but it continues to, there we go, I'm big. It continues just to be a problem that I'm solving little by little by little, and I do have some updates on that. So first, though, good news from me. If you have any good news, share it. If you're working on something cool, share it. If you've had some victories, share it in the chat. For me personally, got to mention, it was Leanna's birthday, my wife, over the weekend. So we make a big deal out of birthdays. Made her a giant cake with my son. Went skiing on Sunday. Went skiing on Sunday, and then Tuesday it was 25 degrees outside. And yeah, that was really good. And also had grandma as a babysitter, which if you have kids, you know how hard it can be to have a babysitter sometimes. So we actually got to go out and go to like an adult dinner. It was like a 4-course dinner, and it was really cool, and ate really good, delicious food. So anyways, that's the good news from me. And let's see. Oh yeah. And then on the video recording front, I just have to celebrate because it was a huge pain in the butt. But we're releasing the Symphony 7 tutorial, first tutorial right now, which for many of you might not be that interesting because you've probably worked with Symphony for a long time. But it's the first video with me in the video sometimes, which was, if you've watched these, a big, long setup of getting my recording studio done. This is not my recording studio. This is at the office. So just like emotionally, it was like this big, giant, kind of scary new thing to change the recording process, change the audio, do all this lighting, and have to worry about how does that change the editing. So the first few ones of those are out, and I think it's cool. We're kind of feeling out how much to show me, and yeah, I don't know. I'm just happy to have that behind me. Sometimes there's big, scary new things. I realize sometimes that my job, I feel good at my job, and everything feels good, and then I do something new, and I realize that I think I feel good at my job a lot of times because I just get to do the same thing over and over again. So I put this new thing there as a reminder of like, yeah, sometimes things are hard and it's kind of an uncomfortable feeling, and that's good. It's good for me, but I don't love it. I like feeling when I'm like, I like the feeling of me being good at things more than me being bad at things. So, oh, thanks for the comment on the studio. I was very excited about how it looked. Again, this is not it, but you've seen last week's stream and the online videos showed it a bit. All right, so let's get into some morphing updates. The first thing this week is we had an impact actually on Turbo's morphing. There was let's see here. There was a back and forth on Turbo's morphing. This kind of shows how difficult of a problem it is. So the problem that Turbo was trying to solve was that if you have, actually let me get a site up here just so I can have an example. Yes, I meant open local, not open and local. There we go. All right, so the problem was basically that if you are active in a box like this and you type, if you maybe have a stimulus controller that's auto-submitting this form as you type, you would sometimes lose the value. So what would happen here is if I type ABCDE and it auto-submits the form, then in theory, if I've done my code correctly, then the new HTML that's going to come back on the page is going to have ABCDE in it as the value, because this value here is going to be submitted into the form. And so when our form re-renders, it will have the little value equals inside of there. And so in theory, that's fine. The morphing would see that, and there's basically nothing to morph. You have a input on the page with value A, B, C, D, E, and you have new HTML with value A, B, C, D, E, and everything is fine. The tricky part comes when you type A, B, C, D, E, and then the request starts for the submit, and while the request is processing, you type FG. Now we do have a problem, because on your front end, you have value equals A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but then in a moment when the AJAX request finishes and morphing starts, that has A, B, C, D, E. And so what would happen is you would type kind of FG, and then 200 milliseconds later, those would disappear. And so obviously not the experience that we want. So anyways, it turned out that the way that they solved this was that when they call idiomorph, which is the underlying morphing library that takes the current HTML on the page and the new HTML and changes the current HTML to look like the new HTML, it has an option called ignore active value, which it does what it sounds like. It says, hey, when you're morphing, if you get to a field that's active, just ignore its value. Like, don't try to set the new value. So if we have A, B, C, D, E, F, G in this box, but the new HTML has A, B, C, D, E, that option says ignore it. Don't try to change the value, right? So this seems like this is the solution that we want, but this is a bit of in English we say whack-a-mole. I've used that expression with other people. I think there's a different expression in every language where you solve one problem and you create another problem. So the problem was that if you have a form, the problem was when you have a form reset. So imagine that this time I type A, B, C, D, E, and actually I have this is, I'm not going to use this page too much because it's a little bit broken right now because I'm breaking it locally. But anyways, if you imagine I have A, B, C, D, E in here and I hit enter to submit the form, in that case, this input is still going to be the focused input. But let's say when I hit enter, what we do is we submit the form submits successfully, and we redirect and we render an empty form. So ultimately what that looks like to the morphing library is it looks like we have this on our page, and the new HTML contains an input with value equals nothing. So the new HTML has an input that looks like this with value equals nothing because we want to empty the form, right? We want to reset the form. Well, when you had this ignore active value set to true, that wasn't possible. Because you are active in this field, like you hit enter when you were in this field, this A, B, C, D, E would always stay in there. So the result is that if you had 10 fields on your form, the other 9 fields would all correctly get reset and empty. And then for some random reason, seemingly, this one field at the bottom would always keep its value. So anyway, this was reverted in Turbo last week. And the most recent version of Turbo, I think it's 03. 03 contains that change. So it just highlights kind of how tricky getting morphing correct is. And on that whack-a-mole topic, this created another issue. Oh, actually, I'm looking at it right now. So now that this ignore active value thing is totally gone, it seems like life is good, but we are back to that original problem that I described. In fact, I have a little video of it I made here. So we're back to that problem where if you type and the form is submitted and then you keep typing while the AJAX call is happening, your text gets run over. So you can watch here. I type. I'm probably going to type. Oh, it totally does not want to play video while I'm streaming for some reason. Okay, well, you have to use your imagination there. Yeah, it totally does not want to. Come on, technology. Anyway, it's as I described down here. I said I type Apple, I pause, it submits the form, I type more, and that ends up getting reverted. So we're back to that original problem, which is if you have this is common for a search, right? You might have a search, and as you're typing into the search, you're auto-submitting the search form, which is great, and then you're updating some results below. It's a really nice possibility with Turbo morphing. So this kills that. And I don't know what the solution is exactly. Well, we finally got to a solution down here. It's kind of interesting. The solution is you can't have it both ways. Like we have two sources of truth here. Sometimes we want the server to be the source of truth. Like if the server returns back an empty form, then we don't care. Like take the inputs and empty their value because that's what the server said. But in other situations, we want the opposite. We want to say, hey, I'm typing into this search box and the form is auto-submitting, but I realize the user might keep typing. Like that's just the nature of this form. And so in this case, I want the source of truth to be the front end, the value that's actually in the focused box. So you can't have it both ways. I don't think there is a way to solve this in Turbo out of the box. So the solution that was presented is kind of clever. Like it's not incredibly satisfying because it's not an out of the box solution, but it's to make a stimulus controller so that when your input gets focus, so I'll make this a little bit bigger here. It's kind of clever. So on your input, you add data-action equals, and then when your item is focused, you call some element on a custom controller called make permanent. And what that would do is add the data turbo permanent attribute onto that input. And then when you blur out of it, it would remove that attribute. So data turbo permanent, that tells the morphing library, don't touch this field at all. So it's kind of cool because this allows you to opt into this behavior when you need to. And it's kind of an annoying extra step to have, but it's also really descriptive and understandable. You could actually see this on your page if you wanted to. You could click into the box and see that attribute go on there, and then click off of the box and see the attribute go away, and that should work. Oh yeah, question about Tara. Should that input be disabled that time while the AJAX request is done? In the case of you submitting a form, I think you can disable the field there, but in the case of the user experience of you wanting to just let them type into a box, it doesn't make sense to disable it there, obviously, and that's where things actually get especially tricky. So anyways, I just want to highlight this is kind of the thing that's hanging out there. I expect more people at some point will probably ask this question, and maybe it'll get reopened, but at least now there's kind of a way to solve this. There's a path forward. Now LiveComponents does solve this, but LiveComponents is more of a hands-on library. So LiveComponents is able to solve this because LiveComponents, when it triggers the AJAX request, it actually watches all of your input, all of your form elements inside of your component. So, well, actually, this is a great example of here. Let's say you type into this, let's pretend this is a live component. You type into this box, live component triggers a re-render with the new value. And the moment it starts that AJAX call, it watches all of the form elements inside of the component for changes. And if any of those change before the AJAX request finishes, then the modified value on the front end is used. So in other words, it detects that the user typed a few extra characters while the AJAX request is happening, and it preserves those. So it's a little bit more hands-on. It's more hands-on than Turbo can really be. It doesn't really have context about, a component like look in this area or this form. It's kind of dumb. It's just saying, I don't know, something's morphing me, and so that's what I'm gonna do. Oh yeah, Mateo there. You just asked the question that I answered. Yep. Sometimes I forget how we solve these in LiveComponents. It's a lot of work has gone into these little details. Yeah. So that is the update on Turbo and morphing, and the kind of meat of what I want to get into goes back to this pull request. I mentioned this one last week a little bit. The pull request that will hopefully not kill me. This has to do with autocomplete and morphing, which is, as I mentioned last week, is probably the most complicated situation for morphing. So here I have the autocomplete. I'm just on the UX site locally. Here's the autocomplete spot here. And as I mentioned, the tricky things with autocomplete are that you initialize it on a select element, but then it makes a number of changes. It actually changes the for attribute on the label. it adds a few classes to your select, and it adds this entire new element. So the challenge with morphing is that when morphing happens, the new HTML from the server is going to have the old for attribute. It's going to have a select without these custom classes that were added, and it's not going to have this div at all. So naturally, when you morph, it's just going to run over, it's going to remove all of your changes. So that's the problem that I am trying to fix inside of Autocomplete right now, is make Autocomplete aware of turbo morphing and prevent these changes. And then the second side of it, to make things even a bit more complicated, is, okay, once we've solved the problem of, hey, morphing, don't remove the custom changes from TomSelect, we have a second problem, which is that under certain conditions, we need to reinitialize TomSelect. So a really good example of this would be if we, actually, I think you can see it right now. So I've typed in, I have a value up here, I have a value down there, and I'm going to submit this form. So I already have this set up for morphing. So I didn't show that behind the scenes, but behind the scenes, this is on a branch. It's on that pull request. It's using Turbo 8 morphing behind the scenes. So when I submitted that form, it did turbo morphing. Notice we got a problem here. The value stuck. So what happens is, let me back up here. When I submitted that form successfully, it redirected back to this page and re-rendered a page with an empty form. So from a morphing perspective, we just made an AJAX call, and the new HTML for the new page is an empty form. So we're morphing the form we had before to an empty form. And you can see down here for a normal form field, no problem. It goes from the old input that had the value to the new input that didn't have the value. No problem. And in fact, it kind of worked down here too. You can see the select element here. Look, there's no options inside of it. So the new HTML from the server rendered a select with no options inside of it. So if this were a normal select field, it would have worked fine. We would have gone from a select element with one item selected, and then we would have gone, when we morphed, it would have gone back to a normal select element with nothing selected. So the problem is that TomSelect, it initializes based on your select element and the options inside your select element. And then if those options change later, like morphing changes which option is the currently selected option, or even changes what the options are, TomSelect doesn't notice that. It just keeps on doing its thing, thinking that nothing happened under the hood, which is why we still have this Apple thing inside of there. So it's tricky. I think this is a solvable problem. I think it's just a really complex situation. So I'm going to walk through and just kind of go through this. I started this morning. I'll be honest with you, this problem is confusing my brain. So I'm probably going to do a bunch of stupid stuff. If you see me doing something stupid and you spot the problem, let me know. But I'm going to walk you through the thought process, which honestly is probably going to help me walk through the thought process on this as well. So this is a big controller. 90% of this we don't need to worry about right now. So everything starts with, so problem number one, which is solved or nearly solved. Where are you solving that issue? Sorry, Godwin asked that again. I mean, what are you solving that issue, or where? I don't quite understand, but let me know. So the first problem that we want to solve is when turbo morphs, don't undo the changes that TomSelect made. So don't change the for attribute. Like TomSelect changes the for attribute on the select, don't revert it back. So to handle that, we add two event listeners. So Turbo dispatches events when it does morphing, Turbo before morph element, and Turbo before morph attribute. The weird thing about this, which I guess is fine, is that the element that this controller is attached to is the select element. And really, we also need to watch for and prevent changes to the label element and this div down here. So when I set up these event listeners, I actually set them up on the parent element, this div right here. I basically say, tell me any time an element or an attribute is morphed inside of this div. And I do that so I can catch changes to the label, select, or this div down here. So yeah, this parent element, and I add these two event listeners, and these are bound to two different methods down here. So I'm going to jump down to those. And some of these are easy. So the first thing I look for is to see, hey, is the event.target, this is the current element on the page that's being morphed, does it contain the class TS wrapper? So very simple. This one's working. It's easy. It's basically saying, hey, is this the element that's being morphed? If it is, don't morph it. So event.prevent default. The second option down here is more complicated, and I hate this so much. So one of the tricky things is, I mentioned this last week, so I'm not going to go into it too deeply, but one of the things that TomSelect does that's very odd is that as you select options, you can actually see it here, it actually reorders the options. So apple cheese pretzel, if I get rid of apple, I might not actually be able to see it here, but it's easier to see in a non-Ajax autocomplete, a normal select. But anyways, one of the things it does, it actually reorders those options, and it depends on that. So you might render a page that has these 4 options in it, and then the moment the user selects hamburger, it might move hamburger up to the top of this list, which seems harmless, right? The problem is that morphing is going to try to change those back to their original order, and that makes TomSelect totally freak out and do the wrong thing. So there's kind of an extra thing in here where the idea is that when we get the new HTML, if the option elements are the same as they originally were, maybe they're in a different order, but we don't really care about that. But if they are the same as in the original thing, then we don't want to morph. We need to prevent morphing. Otherwise, morphing is going to change the order of those elements back to their original, and that's going to make TomSelect panic. However, if the options are different, then we do want to allow them to be morphed. And this is where things get really, really tricky. So why would we want to allow the options to be morphed? So there's at least 2 use cases here. One use case is dependent form fields. And we actually have one of these. So this is a dependent form field. You click this option here. I may have broken this because I have a whole bunch of changes locally. Yeah, totally. Well, I think I made this page panic. I have a partially hacked version of Autocomplete. Anyways, wow, yeah, exit page. I killed that page. Never mind. Anyways, it's a situation where you have one drop down, you select an element like country, and then it updates a second drop down. So in that situation, if our TomSelect is on the second field that updated, we actually need to realize that. We need to realize, whoa. The new HTML doesn't contain the same options. It's not just a matter of the same options in a different order. It contains new options. So we actually need to allow the options the new options to morph here. And then we need to reinitialize TomSelect. We need to say, hey, TomSelect, you need to throw yourself in the trash and reinitialize yourself from the beginning with the new options that you see inside the select element. The second use case, which I'm just trying to think through my head right now, is the selected value. So this would be a situation where the options didn't change, but the selected option changed. So maybe we have these 4 options here. And maybe if you pretend this is a select element that only accepts one value. So pretzel is selected right now. So you can kind of almost imagine, we don't see it here, but you can almost imagine it looks like that. Pretzel is selected. Then we submit the form and we reset the form, and the new HTML contains the same options, but with no selected option. So in that case, we do want to allow that morphing to happen because we need to get rid of the selected option. And then we also need to reinitialize TomSelect. I'm speaking slowly because I'm realizing one thing you could do there is prevent, and actually I think that's what I'm doing kind of in the code right now. You might not need to allow morphing to happen here because the options aren't really changing. You just need to take note that the value of the new options is not the same as it was before. And so we need to tell TomSelect, hey, you don't need to reinitialize yourself, but change your selected value to this new value. Whew. So you can see maybe why this stuff is confusing me so much. Grab some water. Godwin, by talking of dependent form field, how does it work with dynamic forms library? Can it work by using results from an external API? Yeah, those dynamic forms library is basically just handling the backend side of things in Symfony. So it's hard enough just in Symfony forms to have a situation where if you change one field, it modifies what another field looks like. That's just tricky in general with forms and form events. But dynamic form library doesn't do anything with the front end. It says, hey, if you somehow make an AJAX request with the current data on your form, I'll reinitialize and re-render with the new fields, but you have to figure out how to make that AJAX call and how to put the new values onto your page. Let's see. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question or not, but let me know, because the external API part, I'm not sure what you're thinking about there. If you're thinking about the front end talking to an external API or something with actually dynamic forms talking to an API. Or you might be talking about like the autocomplete options. All right, anyway, back over here on this part. So we are in before morph element. So we're trying to figure out whether or not we want the options to morph. So I look here and say, hey, is the current item being morphed? Is the current element being morphed equal to this element? So is it the select element that's being morphed? And then I also check to make sure that the current target is a select element. That might look confusing, but you have to remember that like 99% of the time, I think about the autocomplete library and TomSelect working with select elements, but it also actually just works with input elements. If you just want an input element that you're auto-completing values into, it works there, and we're not really worried about that case right here. So I'm just double checking we're not working with an input element. All right, now so here I say new options equals, and so event.detail.new element is what the select element looks like in the new HTML. So this may or may not have a new set of options on it. This create options data structure was my way to take option elements and create some sort of structure that describes what's inside of them. So it's important and not important. It effectively loops over all of the options in the select and then creates just like a little structure here, a little structure that says, it's creating basically an array that says what the value of each option is, what its text is, and whether or not it's inside of an option group. So like everything that a little tiny array that describes really what the options are in some repeatable way. So where did I go? There we go. No, this is the wrong spot, because this stuff is complicated. There we go. Here's the spot. So I create this data structure using the options from the new HTML, and then down here I do the same thing with the current option. So let's think about this. I say this is not really needed. It's just for TypeScript, but I basically say, okay, let's call that same create options data structure, and let's pass in the current select element. So we're looking at what actually is on the page right now, the options that are on the page, and the options that are inside of the new HTML, and we're looking to see if those are the same. And that's done by this are options equivalent. I won't look in that, but it compares the two data structures to make sure to see if there's actually any real differences. And if the options are equivalent, then we call event.preventDefault, because we don't want to modify the order of the options, because that's going to mess up TomSelect. Now, one tricky thing with this, and I'm kind of bending my head around right now. So there's two different modes that you can use TomSelect in. One is with AJAX autocomplete, and one is normal. So in the normal mode, your HTML renders a select that kind of looks like this. It's a select that has options in it. Like here are the 4 options. In an AJAX situation, your select actually renders empty. So see here, let's find the select. See, the select has no options in it because, you know, the idea of autocomplete, right, is you might have 1,000 different options and you don't want to render them all on the page, so you're going to use Ajax to do this. The tricky thing is, well, I should say one good thing is, if I select hamburger there, that actually does add hamburger as an option inside the select. And if I submit, because of how Symfony forms work, I can actually see this. When I submit this form, whoops, the page I get back should actually have a select with that one option in it. Yep, it's a little bit ugly inside of here, but there you see the select with the hamburger. So what I mean is that on the front end, TomSelect added this hamburger option, and when we submit that, our select actually doesn't render empty. Symfony actually renders the select element with a single hamburger option. So this is a good situation where the options on the page will continue to match the options on the server. Everything's happy. What I'm worried about when I'm thinking about this, so this is a multi-select, is I've now done two things, hamburger and cheese. And if I submit this, same thing. It's going to render a select with hamburger and cheese on it. But if I remove cheese, if you were watching closely, you saw it reorder the options. Notice that cheese is still there. TomSelect doesn't remove the cheese option, which means when we submit this form, our new HTML is only going to have a hamburger in it. And so the options are going to look different, and it is going to look like we need to reload TomSelect. But maybe that's something that we can detect based on whether or not this is an Ajax autocomplete or not. Like if it's an Ajax autocomplete, oh, that actually makes sense. Okay, if it's an Ajax autocomplete, we don't care about the options. The options are like, what these options are never relevant. We should never allow morphing of the options because the options are entirely determined really based on your Ajax call. So if you have a Ajax autocomplete, we don't need to look and see if the option elements on the page match the option elements on the Ajax call because we don't care. The actual full set of options come from your Ajax call. So we do not need to worry about the option elements. So that actually helps. See, I had to just like talk through it. I'm just going to make a note of that. So let me think here. So in that case, if we are remote, we always want to prevent default. We always want to prevent the morphing. We never want things to reorder. Yeah, and that's okay. So if the options are equivalent, or this dot URL value, that's the value for the Ajax call. I think that's probably the best way to do this. Yep, that is exactly what we use when we set things up. Cool. If the options are the same, or this is an Ajax select, where the options don't represent the actual options, then prevent morph to avoid the problem described below. All right, good. All right, God, let me pop back over here. Now we got good details. Okay, I want to more understand it because I have a special use case when I'm calling it from Symfony form and I don't want to use Ajax request. And dumping step by step how it works is tricky. Yeah, so tell me, let's think here. You have a special use case when I'm calling from Symfony form and I don't really want to use Ajax request. Yeah, so tell me more about that, Godwin. We can even talk on Slack afterwards. Like set up your whole use case of what you are actually trying to build, what's working, what's not working, what error you might be having or not having. Because I don't quite understand yet, but I bet if you fill out the whole story, I bet I'll get what you're talking about. Then we can brainstorm a solution. Okay, so this makes me happy here, I think. This is early, by the way. We have tests for all this stuff, and I'm going to have to get this working with tests. But so far, this is just early enough in my brain process that for me, sometimes it's easier for me to just do weird experimental stuff with tests. In this case, it just feels better for me to do it with this page right here. Okay, so let's think here. I have prevented... I've prevented morphing. I have code to prevent the morphing to prevent morphing this div element away. I didn't show it, but I also have code to prevent the label and select from losing their custom attributes, their custom classes and for element and things like that. And I also have code to prevent morphing the option elements unless they totally change. And if they totally change, that's when we need to reinitialize TomSelect, which I have not shown the code for that yet. So I think we are good on the side of avoiding changing things with morphing that shouldn't be changed. And so we're on to the second side of the problem, which is, oh, and actually I have to, I'm already going longer than I meant to. Well, I'll wrap this up real quick. We're on to the second side of the problem, which is updating TomSelect when we need to. So having code that detects that the options did change and reinitializing, or that the value changed and setting the value. So I'm not going to get into that because I'm out of time right now, but that is handled in a different thing inside of here with what's called a mutation observer. I talked about that probably last week too. This is basically a bit of code. Where is it? It's called onMorph, I think. onMorph. On mutations. There we go. This is a little bit of code that actually has nothing to do with morphing. It's just a way that I can detect if anything changes inside of my select, whether it's from Turbo or something else weird. And this is the kind of the logic I need to get right down here, which is where I'm just checking different things, right? Like, are the options equivalent? Meaning, did the actual options change? Did we have 3 options a second ago, and then we have 5 options? That would require a reset. Did the value change? I'm not sure if that really requires a full reset of TomSelect, but if we have the same 4 options, but the value changed, then we need to make sure that TomSelect is aware of that value because it's just not watching what's coming from the server. All right, I got to run. Thank you all for sitting with me and just being present, for allowing me to have a rubber ducky to talk through that stuff with. That small insight on not considering Ajax-powered autocompletes when options change, I think solved a problem that was breaking my brain. So I think that's good. Okay, I feel a little bit better. All right, I got to run. We will hopefully have a new Symfony UX release today or tomorrow. I got to take a look, but it might be the one that where we make LiveComponents stable. Again, being stable, it's already stable, it's already usable. It's all about us making sure that there's not any backwards compatibility breaks that we know we still need to make. And I think we have everything in right now. So fingers crossed that we can get that. That'd be a huge milestone. And yeah, lots of other cool stuff cooking. But yeah, I'll see everybody out there on the internet. Thanks for hanging out.